This is Radio TV Phononut, and here we have a Teaching Technology Model TT10 classroom record player that has a very Audiotronics-y look to it. We have the light up post here, which Audiotronics has. The knobs look like Audiotronics. The tone arm safety rest to keep the needle from landing on the motor board if you accidentally drop the tone arm looks like Audiotronics. The only thing that looks different is the pause control. The Audiotronics models have the pause control built into the rest back here, whereas this one has the pause control here. Combination power off and pause and then play. The only other thing different I see is the case color, and this turntable platter looks like it used one of those cheesy foam rubber mats that always disintegrate and turn to powder when they get to be about 2 years old. Well, it sounds like we have an intermittent cartridge and the bass is lacking. That could be a bad cartridge or a bad cap in the amplifier. I don't know why, but I wished I had a good condition copy of this album just for kicks. One that had the cover and wasn't cracked at the edge of the record. 18 super hit. Here we are on 45. Yeah, that turntable bearing is very dry. Hear all that racket and all the stuttering it's doing. So yeah, this is going to need a full lube and clean and lube and all that good stuff, which is no surprise. Here's the underside. Definitely an Audiotronics built unit. Hand-wired amplifier on terminal strips on the attached to the motor board. There was an earlier Audiotronics version that was a tube type that used a single 6T9 Compactron, and I was really hoping that's what this was, since it doesn't have the standard "don't open the case" warning on the motor board, but this is still a decent one when it's working right. Yeah, we got this big paper filter capacitor here I'll have to look, but that's probably either a filter or a speaker coupling cap. Got another capacitor here and 3 more capacitors on these terminal strips here. I'll check those and see what kind of shape they're in and replace as needed. Given the age, I should probably just go ahead and change them all. Well, being nice and neat is something you should strive for whenever you're repairing something, but in some cases it can turn into be a headache, like when you're trying to unsolder a lead from a terminal strip connection and the terminal breaks off. As you can see here, yes, this can be remedied because it connects to this terminal over here, which also connects to chassis ground, but I just don't like that sort of thing. Okay, we have all the capacitors replaced and situated where they can't short out to anything. This one here, I just repaired the broken terminal strip with a piece of bus wire. This 10 microfarad capacitor here, I had no choice but to J-hook it because the lead on the replacement part was not nearly long enough. Here are the old parts. This 10 microfarad is the best of the bunch. These 200 microfarads, the blue ones, they check close to 150. And this 500 microfarad checks over 700. And this 2000 microfarad filter, I really can't check it accurately because my cap meter doesn't go that high. As far as ESR, they're not that bad, but the value has gone way up, and that's usually what they do when they age and start approaching death, so just went ahead and decided to get rid of them. And this is a 4-transistor amplifier with 2 of them mounted on this terminal strip, and the other 2 mounted on the motor board itself, and using that as a heat sink. One of them is a TO3 cased device, which you'll see in a minute. And here's the schematic diagram that they're nice enough to give you. Alright, here we are with the platter removed, and this is very dry in this spindle. And here's that TO3 case transistor I was telling you about, made by Bendix. It's nice to see a good American-made transistor in here. Okay, we have everything cleaned out and lubricated. There was a good bit of dried gunk in this thing. And here are the 3 motor mounts that I replaced. This one here, as you can see, is already crumbling apart, which is common for these. So if you run into one that's bad, you just need to go ahead and replace all 3 of them. And as you can see, I cleaned up everything and re-lubricated it with white lithium grease. Took the motor apart, cleaned it up, and oiled it, and it's got nice spin down time now. Cleaned this center spindle bearing and lubricated it. Unplug it here. So yeah, as you can tell, that's good. That's good spin down time. Alright, we're back together, and all I need to do mechanically is find something to replace this turntable mat, and this is going to be a real pain getting all this old gunk scraped off. In the 60s and early 70s, a lot of record players, both classroom and kiddie models, use that foam rubber pad, and even the talking book machines for the blind used them on up until the early 80s. And the reason they used them is because they wanted something that the flexible disc records could play on without slipping on the turntable. But the bad thing is, even when those machines were a few years old in the 80s, I remember seeing them where the foam pad was starting to dry rot and flake off. So you'd have thought they could have come up with something better to use. Okay, you might remember us having intermittent sound earlier in this video, and I said it might be the cartridge. Well, it's not the cartridge. It's something I've seen many times on these Audiotronics players. The cartridge wire was just, ground wire was just barely hanging on to the cartridge holder terminal, and all I had to do was barely touch it with a screwdriver for it to come off. And I think that happens a lot of times with people using these things and constantly flipping the needle back and forth from LP to 78, and over time that causes the wire to eventually break off. So we'll have to take this holder out and resolder the wires, and it should be good to go. Alright, there it is, all resoldered and installed and ready to go. And it helps to have a magnetic screwdriver when taking these little screws out. Makes things a heck of a lot easier. And to magnetize my screwdrivers, I have an old magnet out of an old burned up weed eater motor. That thing's probably been here 30 or 35 years. Not only is it good for picking up screws and such off the floor, it's good at magnetizing screwdrivers. And it's worse, nobody cares. But and that kills power to the whole unit when you put it in pause. But most of all, you feel so alone. God grant me the serenity. Yeah, this is not like an extreme heavy-duty disco bass intensified records.
How can you have such good love?
Okay, I think I know why it's skipping. You see this tab right here that the counterbalance spring attaches to, and the other end of the spring attaches down at the base of the tone arm. And it looks like somebody bent this tab up a little bit to try to lighten the tracking pressure. And these 89T cartridges don't do well at lower tracking pressures. They might do okay for spoken word records, but for music records, it probably can't handle it. It's like you saw a while ago, it just threw the needle out of the groove. So we're going to have to slightly bend this back towards the base of the tone arm, because these cartridges are supposed to track at about 8 grams. Now, I know that's making some of you cringe, but with these school record players, record longevity wasn't the goal. The goal was to make something rugged that could take abuse, and when the cartridge went bad or the needle went bad, you could simply unplug it and plug in a new one and not have to take it to a service shop and have the cartridge replaced. Okay, more problems. Put it all back together and it started cutting in and out again. So whenever it was cutting out, which was most of the time, I checked the continuity between the cartridge terminals, and we have a dead short. So apparently there's a break in the red wire somewhere, and it's shorting out to this outer braided conductor intermittently and causing trouble, which means we may just have to rewire the tone arm. Well, it's not going to focus, so what else is new? Yeah, there was a break in the red wire, and whenever I pulled on it, the insulation just pulled off. So, yeah, we're probably just going to have to rewire this tone arm. Alright, it was by the hardest, but I was able to dig out the center wire, and since they were kind enough to leave us some extra tone arm wire under the motor board, I was able to pull enough out to where I can remount this. Now, let's hope it holds and doesn't short out, because I really don't want to have to rewire this. I think what happened is whenever I was soldering this back together, the heat melted the insulation, which is very easy to do. I don't know why they didn't make this center conductor out of some type of high temperature wire that wouldn't as easily melt from soldering iron heat. And you know, I just noticed this is not a record player, it's a record reader, which means this thing was meant primarily for talking book use, which means it's not really equalized for optimum results with music records, although it doesn't sound horrible. It's certainly better than a Crosley, but it's not a, you know, it doesn't have the full rich tone that the other classroom record players have. I found this mat on an old platter that was off balance, so I just ripped it off of that, and I'm going to clean it up, clean this platter up, and glue it down. The YouTube copyright police pick up on any of this.
Yes, I would, if I only could, I surely would.
Okay, back on the Audiotronics, or excuse me, the Teaching Technologies record reader. As you just heard, the sound is pretty lackluster for this, and like I just said a few moments ago, they probably designed it that way for talking book use. They probably didn't really intend on this to be used for music listening, and I also figured that they didn't intend on this to be used for playing records to large groups. This was probably meant for small group use, or made to be used with a headphone listening station. How many of you remember those? The 4, 6, or 8 headphone stations that had the volume control for each individual headphone. So I decided to try to make this perform a little better, because I know the standard Audiotronics 300E issue sounds better than this. Well, they were nice enough to give us a schematic diagram inside the case of the record player, the record reader, but my eyesight won't allow me to read that. So I took this digital camera, the very one that we're using right now to film this video, and snapped a couple of pictures of the schematic. And yes, the very camera y'all sometimes complain about not being clear enough. And I uploaded those pictures into the computer, and thankfully the camera wanted to cooperate, and I was able to read the schematic once I uploaded it into the computer. Well, my ink's running low on the computer printer, and I just don't want to spend the money on an ink cartridge right now. So I drew this schematic out by hand, and as soon as I took a good look at it, something stood out. This amplifier uses a FET for the preamp input stage, which is good because it's basically the solid-state version of a vacuum tube, and it's a high-impedance device, which is really favorable because that's what a ceramic cartridge really wants to see. And then we come out of here and go to an additional driver stage to boost the signal even more, and then it goes on to the output stage. Well, if you'll look here, we have a coupling capacitor between the drain of the FET, that's where the signal output comes from, and it couples the FET to the base of this driver transistor. It's a 10 microfarad. And we need that, just like in a tube circuit, to block any DC and only allow the AC audio signal to get through. Well, I was perusing the construction of the amplifier chassis, and this is what I found. As you can see, they don't have an electrolytic capacitor in that application. They have a 0.22 microfarad ceramic capacitor. So yeah, I could see how that could, in a solid-state circuit, I could see how that could compromise the audio quality. So let's take that out and put a 10 microfarad electrolytic in here and see what happens. Alright, here it is installed. I had to extend the leads and then insulate them with a combination of heat shrink tubing and wire insulation. And yeah, I need to take this one off and do the same thing to it. It could touch one of these other terminals if it really wanted to. Alright, but for right now, let's put it back together and see if it sounds any better. Alright, that helped a little bit. It's got more volume now. And a couple of other discrepancies I see between the schematic and the actual circuit. This 33k ohm resistor that connects from the base of this driver transistor and the negative terminal of this 100 microfarad filter cap, as well as the two emitters of the output transistors and the speaker coupling cap. The resistor's in the right place in the circuit, but they're using a 22k instead of a 33k. In discrepancy number 2, we have discrepancy number 3, I should say. We have a 680 ohm resistor. It's a feedback, providing a feedback. coming from the output of this speaker coupling cap, the negative side, back around here to this junction of the 100 ohm resistor and the 10 microfarad bypass cap on the source of the FET. Well, in the circuit, they have the resistor connected to the positive side of that 500 microfarad cap, so I think tomorrow we're going to come back down here and redo this circuit and see if it improves things even further. And looking at this handiwork, it looks like it was factory done. It doesn't look like something that a Jake Legs repairman did. But like I've already said 2 or 3 times, I'm sure this was done. This was a custom built job. This Teaching Technology company probably farmed out Audiotronics to build these things and just had them modify the circuit for their particular needs, as in a record player that was more suitable for talking book use. So I'm gonna try these modifications. I'm gonna go back to what the schematic says and see what happens. All we can do is blow up. Okay, I've already made the changes based on what the schematic said, and it does work a little better now. Hold that off a minute. Alright, here's the underside. I cleaned up a couple of capacitors that were in danger of touching something, and the 680 ohm feedback resistor was borderline out of tolerance, so I just went ahead and replaced that with a new one, and it's about ready to go now. Yeah, it's May, but he's already letting you know right now that he will be home by Christmas.
The wooden Indian standing by the door. He fell in love with an Indian maid over in the antique store. Elijah.
Alright, there we go. It's back together and working well.